Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the NUS Museum Anniversary Lecture, Transcultural Imaginations, Revisiting the 1959 Donation from the Government of India to Malaya by Dr. Priya Juradi. We hope you enjoy the lecture. May I now invite Mr. Ahmad Mashadi, Head of NUS Museum, to begin our program this evening.
Good evening. On behalf of the NUS Museum and Ms. Sharon Tan, Director, Center for the Arts, I wish to welcome everyone to our anniversary lecture this evening. A special welcome to the High Commissioner of India to Singapore, His Excellency, Mr. Pirasamy Kumaran, as well as our many distinguished guests. It is a pleasure to have with us Professor Tan Tae-yong, President, Yale NUS College, and Dr. Kenson Kwok, Founding Director for the Asian Civilization Museum of Singapore, to introduce the lecture and the speaker respectively. Their feedback and perspectives leading to the event this evening had been valuable. We also would wish to express our sincere gratitude for the introductions that they are about to give. The museum was established in 1955 as part of the university's predecessor institution, University of Malaya. It was introduced to support art history courses being taught at the university. Between 1955 and 1973, Michael Sullivan and his successor, William Willits, taught at the university, and simultaneously, as part of their work, built up an art collection that are arguably consequential to the way cultural and artistic histories of Malaya and Singapore may be framed. As we relate and compare the collections they introduced and developed to the rise of post-independence museums in Singapore, we may find productive connections, not just by the types of cultural materials and the associated ideas about art and history they introduced, but also through the legacy of students having studied under them. Here, through the first two anniversary lectures organized in 2015 and 2018, we were very privileged to have Professor T.K. Sabapathy and Professor Kwa Chong Guan to recount their experiences as students of art history under Sullivan and Willits respectively, and being art historians and museum professionals to consider and draw perspectives into Sullivan's and Willits' contributions to the researching, teaching, writing, and curating of art during their tenure in Singapore. The collections developed early in the museum's history offer an important glimpse into the collecting practices and the circumstances around them. The major donation of artworks from the Government of India that was received in 1959 is the subject of today's lecture. For us, it is important in several respects. It helps to ground museum practices in terms of materials object, through which ideas concerning cultures, ties between them, and heritage may be prospected. Such activities of collecting are not straightforward. They rely on a very large part of the museum then opportunistic means such as gifts and donations. Can we piece together the background of the donation? How did it connect the work of the university, its institutional aspirations, and the patronage and personalities associated with it? What were the enabling diplomatic conditions and aims being fulfilled through the donations? What implications can we draw about collecting and its contingencies today? Does historical happenstance matter in our regard for heritage? We are delighted to be able to invite Dr. Priya Juradi to further articulate these questions. Dr. Priya started her research in 2018 on this subject, working along interns, student researchers, and it is a privilege to finally, in the midst of stops and starts of the COVID period we are still in, to witness this lecture. Thank you very much, Dr. Priya. And we would like to also thank everyone who had contributed to the organization of the anniversary lecture, including the museum team led by Michelle Quek and Chang Yue-Siang. With that, let us invite Professor Tan Tae-yong President, Yale NUS College, and Chairman of the NUS Museum Academic Committee, to deliver his introduction. Prof. Tan.
Good evening to His Excellency, Mr. P. Kumaran, India's High Commissioner to Singapore. Our special speakers for the evening, Dr. Priya Mahole Jaradi and Dr. Kenson Kwok. Ms. Sharon Tan, Director of the NUS Center for the Arts. Mr. Ahmad Mashadi, Head of NUS Museum. Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends of the NUS Museum and Center for the Arts. Welcome to the NUS Museum's Anniversary Lecture for 2021. This is the third lecture of the series and marks the museum's 66th anniversary. The inaugural lecture, which was first introduced in 2015, coincided with the 60th year of the founding of the University of Malaya Art Museum, the predecessor institution of the NUS Museum. The lecture was delivered by Mr. T.K. Sabapati and focused on Michael Sullivan, the first curator of the University of Malaya Art Museum. Following that, Mr. Kwa Chong Wan delivered a second lecture in 2018, which focused on William Willets, the second curator of the museum. While the first two lectures centered on key individuals that were instrumental to the early development of the museum, this year's lecture pivots towards a new chapter in the series on the museum's collections. This year's lecture delves into a 1959 donation from the Government of India, a gift which is significant not only because it seeded the museum's South and Southeast Asia collection, but it also made the University of Malaya Art Museum the first institutional collection in Singapore which typifies Singapore's regard for its civilizational heritage. When Michael Sullivan first established the museum in 1955, his ambitions and the evolving global climate had a significant bearing on his approach towards the development of the museum's collections. He wanted to assemble a collection that was representative of the diversity of the visual arts in Asia, while seeking to integrate art history and museology as fundamental aspects of university education. Coupled with the emerging post-colonial discourses brought about by the Cold War and the formation of the non-aligned movement, there was an impetus towards recognizing the interconnectivity of cultures within a broad framework and the diversity of Asian cultures. Today, the NUS Museum's permanent collections continue to provide a foundational point of reference to the geopolitical context in which they have been assembled and show their entangled histories through the museum's various exhibitions and programs. The idea of the museum and its histories continue to be shaped by modernity and unfolding discourses in the present. And in the context of education, research, and scholarship, the integration of museology with a wider range of disciplines across the university has provided an expanded lens to reconsider the museum's histories and collections. Tonight's lecture provides a platform in which scholars like Dr. Jaradi are able to present their findings after close engagement with aspects of the museum's collections and generate new conversations that may be relevant to the contemporary world today. While tonight's lecture focuses on one aspect of the seed collection of the museum, namely the South and Southeast Asia collection, future iterations of this lecture series may turn its focus to the Li Kongqian collection of Chinese art that was first initiated at Nanyang University and later transferred to NUS in 1980 when Nanyang and Singapore University merged to form the National University of Singapore. This evening, we are honored to have Dr. Priya Mahole Jaradi to deliver a lecture which explores the motivations behind a 1959 gift from the Government of India to the University of Malaya. The gift comprises 55 artifacts and 100 photographs, some of which are currently on display at the museum's resource gallery and the museum's exhibition, Radio Malaya, Abridged Conversations About Art. Dr. Jaradi has been collaborating with the museum since 2012 in various capacities, including as guest curator, educator, researcher, and advisor. And as convener of the Art History Minor Program in collaboration with the NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the National Gallery Singapore, she continues to work closely with the museum to seek novel ways in which the collection can be used for teaching and learning. Introducing Dr. Jaradi will be Dr. Kenson Kwok, founding director of the Asian Civilizations Museum, or ACM, and the Peranakan Museum. Dr. Kwok joined the National Museum in 1992 as a senior curator to develop the ACM, which would be the first Pan-Asian museum in Asia that would tell the story of Singapore's multi-ethnic and cultural ancestries from an Asian perspective. In 1994, Dr. Kwok organized the exhibition Alam Kara 5,000 Years of India, which showcased the largest number of exhibits ever lent by India. He was also appointed the director of the ACM in the same year, overseeing the opening of the ACM at Armenian Street in 1997, its expansion at Empress Place in 2003, and subsequently the opening of the Peranakan Museum at the ACM's former Armenian Street address in 2008. After his retirement as director of the ACM, he continues to play an active role in the arts and museum sector in Singapore as a member of various museum committees and delivering lectures about museology and Asian art. May I now invite Dr. Kenson Kwok for the introductory address. Kenson, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tan. This evening, as Prof. Tan has just told us, we are marking the 66th anniversary of the University Museum. However, I should point out that this museum is the second oldest museum collection in Singapore. In the early years, the collection covered 5 broad categories. 1, ceramics from China and Southeast Asia. 2, Malay and Islamic material. 3, ancient Southeast Asian sculpture. 4, works by Malayan artists. And 5, works by Indian artists and ancient Indian sculpture. The history of this collection has been well documented by Kanaga Sabapati. Dr. Jaradi, however, will be delving deeper into one aspect of the collection this evening. My remarks will, I hope, provide a counterpoint. So I won't be touching so much on the museum, on the university collection, but on other collections in Singapore. The oldest museum in Singapore is what we know today as the National Museum. Its history up to the 1980s has been once again well documented by Gretchen Liu. Starting life in 1887, the remit of that museum, in the words of the governor of the time, I quote, was to display every possible product of these countries, that is of the region, and specimens not only in mineralogy or natural history and botany, but also industrial exhibits, unquote. Almost 100 years later, in the 1970s, a major reorganization involved the hiving off of the zoological collection and the opening of an art gallery. While this resembles somewhat the defined scope of the university collection, there was one major difference. The National Museum's focus remained local and regional. It did not cover India nor its neighbors in South Asia. At the time, however, at that same time, the university collection, including ancient Indian sculpture, was on loan to and displayed at the National Museum. In fact, I recall seeing it during my vacations back in Singapore. However, in 1989, these loans were returned to the university. In the National Museum's artifact storage facility, in the 1990s, I saw some cement sculptures from the Sivan Temple, which was demolished sometime in the 80s to make way for the Dhoby Ghaut MRT. There wasn't very much more Indian material in the national collection at that time. However, this was going to soon change. A new ministry had been created in 1990, the Ministry of Information and the Arts, with George Yeo as its minister. A new statutory board, the National Heritage Board, was set up in 93 to oversee, amongst many other things, an expansion from one national museum to several. The National Museum was repositioned into a Singapore History Museum, and the other parts of its collection spun off to two new museums to be, the Singapore Art Museum and the Asian Civilizations Museum. The latter, the ACM, was Minister Yeo's ambitious refocusing of a recommendation for there to be a standalone Southeast Asia gallery. Instead, he decided Singapore should have a museum to reflect the ancestral cultures of Singaporeans. This new museum, which would become the ACM, would therefore look at the world not only through the lens of Southeast Asia, but also that of China, South Asia, and the Islamic world. This may sound even more like an echo of the founding idea for the university collection, but the motivation was not, I think, quite the same. It was not only an acknowledgement of a cultural reality. I believe it also sprang from a particular vision of Singapore's place in a globalized world. In other words, there was a geopolitical dimension to the idea. I joined the National Heritage Board in '93 and was tasked with realizing this grand vision. Never mind that there were yawning voids in the collection, the almost total absence of South Asian and Islamic material among them. How to fill these voids and other gaps so that we could have a credible new museum was a problem that we had to solve, and within a very short time frame. So we negotiated a raft of medium and long-term loans from individuals and institutions across the globe so that we would have time to build up the collection. For the same reason, we also faced the opening of the museum, which Prof. Tan has just mentioned, opening in Armenian Street in '97 and at Empress Place in 2003. The 1990s were a time when Singapore was working towards closer rapprochement with India, and cultural exchange was a part of discussions. The first exhibition from Kolkata in '93, soon after I joined, was followed by Alamkar in 1994. The National Museum, New Delhi, received us very warmly and put their collection at our disposal for this exhibition. Much later, we learned that the exhibition was in fact the result of a top-level agreement between the leaders of the two countries. For many reasons, novelty, quality, quantity of exhibits, the presence of Buddha's relics, the very innovative exhibition design, Alamkar was a spectacular success. I'm sure this was noticed in India because both the minister in charge of culture at the time and the Indian PM of the day visited the exhibition. It certainly did not harm our ongoing request to India for the long-term loan of artifacts for our new museum. We reiterated this request at every biennial review of the MOU. After some years, our determination paid off, but in a most unexpected way. In the year 2000, on the eve of a state visit to Singapore by the President of India, we were informed by the High Commission that Mr. Narayanan would be bringing several sculptures, several pieces of sculptures with him to present to the museum. The Ganesh that you see on the screen was appropriately one of the three pieces that arrived with the President in Singapore. These superb sculptures were destined to be the key attractions in the South Asia Gallery of the ACM at Empress Place. Another two batches of long-term loans arrived in 2003, just in time for the grand opening. Much of the credit for ACM's success here must go to Dr. Gauri Krishnan, whose knowledge not only earned the museum credibility and the confidence of colleagues in India, it also enabled ACM to form a comprehensive and significant South Asian collection in a relatively short time. So the Vishnu that you see next to Ganesh is one of the important pieces now in the national collection. Time does not permit me to describe the ACM's other major collaborations with India, except to mention that these included a return exhibition sent by the ACM to the National Museum, New Delhi. Whether the earlier contact between colonial Singapore and Malaya and a newly independent India that Dr. Gerardi will tell us about, whether that impacted what I've described above is difficult to say. It was seen that the ACM experience was the product of a particular time and a slightly different set of circumstances. What is common, though, to both is the fact that both institutions have benefited from collection sharing, whether this was through gifting, loan, or exchange. Given the imbalance in museum collections worldwide, with some countries and some institutions having so much and others too little, and also the problem of the illicit trade in antiquities, institutional collecting sharing is surely the way forward. But for many reasons, still not enough governments and institutions do it. What Singapore and India have achieved, therefore, both at the university collection and at ACM, is exceptional and noteworthy. I now have the pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Priya Mahole Gerardi is currently senior lecturer and convener for art history at NUS. She obtained her BA at the University of Mumbai and MA from SOAS. She was at the ACM for 2 years. Perhaps her stint there has sparked an interest in the study of collections, because that was what she went on to investigate it for her doctorate on collecting, patronage, and education in the former princely state of Baroda. Dr. Gerardi has published extensively and is involved in a wide range of academic activities, details of which you will find in her CV. Her lecture tonight draws on her work investigating the representation of South Asia in Singapore's museums. May I now call on Dr. Gerardi to address us. The floor is yours, Priya.
Professor Tan and Dr. Kwok for contextualizing this evening's presentation as beautifully and generously as you have. Before I begin the presentation, I'd like to welcome all our guests. High Commissioner of India to Singapore, His Excellency Mr. Periyasamy Kumaran, Director, Center for the Arts, NUS, Ms. Sharon Tan, Head, NUS Museum, Mr. Ahmad Mashadi, Director, National Gallery, Singapore, Dr. Eugene Tan, Heads of Department and members of the Deanery at NUS, Professor Tan Tayom, Dr. Kenson Kwok, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, family, and friends who've joined us from so many different time zones, I extend a very warm welcome to you from the NUS Museum in Singapore. Let me begin by taking you on a journey which leads up to today's presentation. As we know, this evening's research revolves around a donation of artifacts which was made by the Government of India to the University of Malaya Art Museum in 1959. You will agree that as the first recorded gift from an independent India to a late colonial Singapore and Malaya, the 1959 donation is of immense historical and museological value. We've also learned through Dr. Kwok's introduction that this donation may have been a beginning in a long trajectory of India-Singapore museum-based partnerships, which continue to thrive even today. It was head of the museum, NUS Museum, Ahmad Mashadi's long-standing wish to research this donation and its underlying motivations. Ahmad approached me to undertake this research at the last anniversary lecture in April 2018. Associate Professor Gyanesh Kudesia of the South Asian Studies program offered astute advice on archival research and, more importantly, the cast of characters to expect in this story. With these crucial cues in place, the museum engaged a New Delhi-based archivist, Dr. Shilpi Goswami, who began work at the National Archives and the National Museum in New Delhi. Meanwhile, the NUS Museum brought on board students from our very own art history minor as research assistants. Roy Un, Rachel Lim, and Dylan Ching organized and annotated numerous textual and pictorial sources. I thank you, Roy, Rachel, and Dylan for your scrupulous work and unmatched dedication. Along the way, we also enjoyed insightful conversations with the collections officer, Devika Murugaya, and visiting scholars, the late Professor Frederick Asher, Professor Himanshu Prabhare, and Dr. Alexander Shaw. I was fortunate to benefit of internal and overseas platforms which allowed me to present this research in various stages. The South Asian Studies program at NUS, the Heidelberg Center for Transcultural Studies, and the CAA Getty's workshops provided timely feedback. In these contexts, I wish to highlight the exceptional generosity of the late Professor Emeritus Frederick Asher of the University of Minnesota, Professor Monica Juneja, University of Heidelberg, and our very own professors, T.K. Sabapathy, Kwa Chongwan, and Maurizio Pileggi. Thanks are also due to Professor Patrick Flores, University of the Philippines, and Dr. Roger Nelson, National Gallery, Singapore, for their pertinent comments. I extend my appreciation to the Dean's Office, in particular, Professor Lionel Wee, and to the former head of our Department of History, Associate Professor Ian Gordon, for their unstinting support towards travel and research grants. Lastly, I extend my gratitude to the NUS Museum team, which has worked tirelessly to put together the anniversary lecture despite the repeated pandemic-related disruptions. Ye Xiang Chang, Michelle Kwek, Rie Ong, and Marianne Lim have overseen the many administrative threads of this project with great efficiency. Warda Muhammad has designed the elegant invitations, flyers, and virtual backdrop for this evening. Mao Zongcheng has been instrumental in providing the technical and production assistance required for the event. Finally, I will like to place on record that this project is held together by the immense faith that one person has invested in me, Ahmad Mishadi. Thank you, Ahmad, for trusting me with this important research. I also remain indebted to the Director for the Arts, Sharon Tan, who I know has supported every aspect of this project unconditionally. Thank you, Sharon.